What if I told you that hidden within the most skipped book of the Bible lies the greatest family saga ever written? A story that begins at the dawn of creation and leads to an eternal throne. Most people close their Bibles when they see 1 Chronicles, dismissing it as endless genealogies and boring lists. But they're missing something extraordinary. These aren't just names, they're bloodlines of destiny. Warriors who defied impossible odds, and a king whose dance before God would change worship forever. Within these chapters, you'll discover why a man's hand froze to his sword in battle, how 3 soldiers risked everything for a cup of water, and the shocking moment when touching God's ark meant instant death. This is the untold story of how a shepherd boy became the greatest king in Israel's history, and how God made a promise that would echo through eternity. Forget everything you thought you knew about 1 Chronicles. This is the book like you've never seen before. The book starts with something most people rush past, but there's power in what's written here. Right in the opening verses of chapter 1, we read the names that connect everything: Adam, Seth, Enosh, Kenan, Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, Noah. These aren't random names thrown together. This is your family tree if you're reading this. This is humanity's starting line. The writer keeps going, naming Noah's 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. From these 3 men came every nation you've ever heard of. The descendants of Japheth spread out and became the people of the coastlands. Ham's sons included Cush, Egypt, Put, and Canaan. These names became places, kingdoms, entire civilizations. Each one of these lines grew into nations that filled the earth. But the writer isn't interested in following all of them. He's looking for one specific path. Then in verses 17 through 27, the focus narrows. The line moves through Shem, and suddenly we're following a specific path. The sons of Shem: Elam, Ashur, Arphaxad, Lud, and Aram. The names keep flowing like a river that knows exactly where it's going. Arphaxad had Shelah. Shelah had Eber. From Eber came Peleg. And the text notes something important. In his days, the earth was divided. We don't get the full story here, just the note that something significant happened in Peleg's lifetime that changed the world. The genealogy continues through Peleg to Reu, then to Serug, Nahor, Terah, and finally lands on a name that changes everything: Abram, who is Abraham. This isn't just a list. This is a roadmap showing that from the very first man, God had a plan, and that plan was always pointing toward one family, one people, one promise. Every single generation from Adam to Abraham is accounted for, proving that Israel's story didn't start in a vacuum. It started at the beginning of everything. Now in verse 28, the story zooms in on Abraham's family, the sons of Abraham, Isaac and Ishmael. Both sons are listed, but watch what happens next. The text gives us Ishmael's 12 sons: Nebaioth, Kedar, Adbeel, Mibsam, Mishma, Duma, Massa, Hadad, Tema, Jetur, Naphish, and Kedema. These became princes of their people, leaders of their own tribes. They weren't forgotten or dismissed. They mattered. But then the chronicler moves on quickly. Verse 34 makes the choice clear. Abraham was the father of Isaac. The sons of Isaac were Esau and Israel. Again, both brothers are named, but the pattern continues. Esau's descendants get their moment. Verse 35 lists Esau's sons: Eliphaz, Reuel, Jush, Jalam, and Korah. Then the text goes deeper, naming the sons of Eliphaz: Teman, Omar, Zepho, Gatam, Kenaz, Timnah, and Amalek. The sons of Reuel: Nahath, Zerah, Shammah, and Mizah. These became the chiefs of Edom, each one ruling over their territory. Then verses 43 through 54 catalog the kings who ruled in Edom before any king ruled over Israel. These were powerful men: Bela, son of Beor, whose city was named Dinhabah. When Bela died, Jobab, son of Zerah from Bozrah, succeeded him. When Jobab died, Husham from the land of the Temanites succeeded him. The list continues through Hadad, Samlah, Shaul, Balhanan, and Hadad. Each king is named, each city is recorded. These were real rulers with real power, but here's what matters. The text acknowledges them and moves on. They were branches off the main trunk, but they weren't the branch God was following. Isaac's line through Jacob, who became Israel, is where the promise lives. The other nations came from Abraham's family too, but they weren't chosen to carry the covenant forward. That job belonged to one son, then to one grandson, and the selection process shows us something important about how God works. He chooses, and his choices shape history. Chapter 2 opens with the 12 sons of Israel listed by name: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Dan, Joseph, Benjamin, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. All 12 are acknowledged. These are the tribes that would become the nation. But immediately the text does something interesting. Instead of going through them in birth order or giving them equal time, it jumps straight to Judah in verse 3. The sons of Judah, Onan, and Shelah. The text mentions that was wicked in the Lord's sight, and God took his life. Then it names Perez and Zerah, born to Judah through Tamar, 5 sons total. From Perez came Hezron and Hamul. The line continues through Hezron, and suddenly we're tracking multiple family branches within Judah's tribe. Verses 9 through 17 follow Hezron's descendants carefully. Hezron had 3 sons, Jerahmeel, Ram, and Caleb. The text follows Ram's line first. Ram was born to Hezron, and from Ram came Amminadab, then Nachshon, a leader of the people of Judah, then Salmon, then Boaz, then Obed, then Jesse. And verse 15 tells us Jesse had 7 sons, with David being the 7th. There it is, the royal line emerging from this tribe. Every name in this chain matters because it leads to the king. But the chapter doesn't stop with David. It goes back and traces other branches. Verses 18 through 24 detail Caleb, son of Hezron. Caleb had children by his wife Azubah and by Jerioth. When Azubah died, Caleb married Ephrath, who bore him Hur. Hur became the father of Uri, and Uri the father of Bezalel. Later, when Hezron was 60 years old, he married the daughter of Machir, the father of Gilead. She bore him Segub, who was the father of Jair, who controlled 23 towns in Gilead. Verses 25 through 41 trace Jerahmeel's line, the firstborn of Hezron. He had sons by his first wife, Ram the firstborn, then Bunah, Oren, Ozem, and Ahijah. Jerahmeel had another wife named Atara, who was the mother of Onam. The descendants continue through multiple generations, each name representing a family that grew and spread throughout Judah's territory. Verses 42 through 55 return to Caleb's descendants. The text lists his sons and grandsons, the towns they founded, and the clans that emerged from them. These aren't just names. These are real people who built towns, raised children, and carried on the line that would eventually produce kings. The chapter ends by mentioning the clans of scribes who lived at Jabez, the Tirathites, Shimeathites, and Succothites. These were Kenites who came from Hamath, the father of the Rechabites. Every branch mattered because they all belonged to the tribe that would rule. Chapter 3 gets personal. Verse 1 starts with David's sons born in Hebron, and the writer gives us every detail. Amnon was the firstborn, by Ahinoam of Jezreel. Daniel the second, by Abigail of Carmel. Absalom the third, whose mother was Maacah, daughter of Talmai, king of Geshur. Adonijah the fourth, by Haggith. Shephatiah the fifth, by Abitol, and Ithream the sixth, by his wife Eglah. 6 sons from 6 different wives during his time in Hebron, where he ruled for 7.5 years. Then verse 5 shifts to Jerusalem, where David reigned for 33 years. There, Bathsheba, daughter of Amiel, bore him 4 sons, Shimeah, Shobab, Nathan, and Solomon. These 4 came from the same mother, but the text also lists 9 more sons born to David in Jerusalem by other wives. Ibhar, Elishua, Eliphalet, Noga, Nepheg, Japhia, Elishama, Eliada, and Eliphalet. Plus there were sons by his concubines, and there was Tamar, their sister. David had a large family, and from this family would come the kings of Judah. Verse 10 begins tracking Solomon's line, and this is where we see king after king listed in succession. Solomon's son was Rehoboam, Abijah his son, Asa his son, Jehoshaphat his son, Jehoram his son, Ahaziah his son, Joash his son, Amaziah his son, Azariah his son, Jotham his son, Ahaz his son, Hezekiah his son, Manasseh his son, Ammon his son, Josiah his son. Each name represents a reign, a generation, a continuation of David's throne. Verse 15 mentions Josiah's sons: Johanan the firstborn, Jehoiakim the second, Zedekiah the third, and Shallum the fourth. Verse 16 lists Jehoiakim's successors: Jehoiachin his son and Zedekiah. Then comes the exile. Jehoiachin was taken captive to Babylon, but the line didn't end there. Verses 17 through 24 continue tracking the descendants even after the kingdom fell. The text lists the descendants of Jehoiachin the captive: Shealtiel his son, Malchiram, Pedaiah, Shenazar, Jechamiah, Hoshama, and Nedabiah. Pedaiah's sons were Zerubbabel and Shimei. Zerubbabel would become the governor who led the people back from Babylon to rebuild the temple. His sons were Meshullam and Hananiah, and Shelemith was their sister. There were also 5 others: Hashubah, Ohel, Berechiah, Hasadiah, and Jushab-Hesed. The genealogy extends even further through Hananiah's descendants, then through Pelatiah and Jeshiah, and continues through several more generations. The royal line didn't die in exile. It survived, waiting, preserved through every disaster, because God's promise to David couldn't be broken. Even when the throne was gone, the bloodline remained. Chapter 4 opens by circling back to other parts of Judah's family tree that haven't been fully explored yet. Verse 1 lists descendants of Judah: Perez, Hezron, Carmi, Hur, and Shobal. Then verse 2 tells us that Reiah, son of Shobal, was the father of Jahath, and Jahath was the father of Ahumai and Lahad. These were the clans of the Zorathites, families that lived in specific regions. Verses 3 and 4 mention the sons of Etam: Jezreel, Ishma, and Idbash, with their sister named Hazelelponi. Then Penuel, who was the father of Gedor, and Ezer, the father of Husha. These descended from Hur, the firstborn of Ephrathah and father of Bethlehem. Each name represents a founding father of a town or clan. Verses 5 through 8 mention Asher, the father of Tekoa, who had 2 wives, Helah and Nara. Nara bore him Ahuzam, Hefer, Temeni, and Hahashtari. These were the descendants of Nara. The sons of Helah were Zereth, Zohar, Ethnan, and Koz. Koz was the father of Anub and Hazobeba, and of the clans of Aharhel, son of Harum. Simple family records, showing how the tribe expanded and filled different territories. Then verse 9 introduces someone different, someone who stands out from the list. Jabez was more honorable than his brothers. His mother had named him Jabez, saying, "I gave birth to him in pain." The name Jabez sounds like the Hebrew word for pain. He was marked from birth by difficulty, but that's not where his story ended. Verse 10 records what made him honorable. Jabez cried out to the God of Israel, "Oh, that you would bless me and enlarge my territory. Let your hand be with me and keep me from harm, so that I will be free from pain." And God granted his request. In the middle of all these names, here's a man who prayed with boldness and specificity. He asked for blessing, for expansion, for God's presence, and for protection. And God said yes. The text doesn't give us more details, but it gives us enough. Jabez prayed and God answered. The chapter continues through verses 11 to 20, listing more families. Caleb, the brother of Shuhah, was the father of Mehir, who was the father of Eshton. Eshton was the father of Beth Rapha, Paseah, and Tehinnah, the father of Ir-Nahash. These were the men of Rekah. The sons of Kenaz were Othniel and Sariah. Othniel's sons were Hathath and Meonothai. The families kept branching and growing. Verse 14 mentions something interesting, the Valley of Craftsmen, called that because the people who lived there were skilled workers. Verse 21 talks about the sons of Shelah, son of Judah, the father of Leka, later the father of Marisha, and the clans of the linen workers at Beth Ashbea, Joachim, the men of Kozeba, and Joash and Saraph, who ruled in Moab, and Jashubi-Lehem. These records are from ancient times. Verse 23 even mentions potters who lived at Netaim and Gedera and worked for the king. These weren't just warriors. These were craftsmen, workers, people who made things and built communities. They worked with linen, they made pottery, they created things of value. Every family had a role in building Judah into something strong and productive. Verse 24 shifts to another tribe. The descendants of Simeon, Nemuel, Jamin, Jerib, Zerah, and Shaul. The text then traces Shaul's line down through the generations. Shaul's son was Shallum, Mibsam his son, and Mishma his son. Verse 26 continues, the descendants of Mishma, Hamuel his son, Zakur his son, and Shimei his son. Verse 27 notes something important about Shimei. Shimei had 16 sons and 6 daughters, but his brothers did not have many children. So their entire clan did not become as numerous as the people of Judah. Simeon never grew as large as Judah. They remained a smaller tribe, even though they had many settlements. Verses 28 through 31 list where Simeon's people lived. They lived in Beersheba, Moladah, Hazar-Shual, Bilhah, Ezem, Tolad, Bethuel, Hormah, Ziklag, Beth-Markaboth, Hazar-Susim, Beth-Biri, and Sharem. These were their towns until the reign of David. Verse 32 adds that their surrounding villages were Etam, Ain, Rimmon, Token, and Ashan, 5 towns, and all the villages around these towns as far as Baalath. These were their settlements, and verse 33 tells us they kept genealogical records. Then the text names their leaders in verses 34 through 38. Meshobab, Jamlech, Joshua, son of Amaziah. Joel, Jehu, son of Joshibiah, the son of Sariah, the son of Asiel, also Elioenai, Jacobah, Jeshohaiah, Asaiah, Adiel, Jesimiel, Benaiah, and Ziza, son of Shiphi, the son of Alon, the son of Jediah, the son of Shimri, the son of Shemaiah. Verse 38 explains, the men listed above by name were leaders of their clans. Their families increased greatly, and they went to the outskirts of Gedor, to the east of the valley, in search of pasture for their flocks. Verse 40 tells us what they found. They found rich, good pasture, and the land was spacious, peaceful, and quiet. Some Hamites had lived there formerly. The land was perfect for their needs. Verse 41 explains what happened next. The men whose names were listed came in the days of Hezekiah, king of Judah. They attacked the Hamites in their dwellings, and also the Munites who were there, and completely destroyed them, as is evident to this day. Then they settled in their place, because there was pasture for their flocks. Verse 42 adds another conquest, and 500 of these Simeonites, led by Pelatiah, Neariah, Rephaiah, and Uzziel, the sons of Ishi, invaded the hill country of Seir. They killed the remaining Amalekites who had escaped, and they have lived there to this day. Simeon was still fighting for land, still expanding, still claiming territory. They weren't content with what they had. They needed more pasture, more space, and they took it by force when necessary. Chapter 5 opens with an explanation that sets the stage for everything that follows. Verse 1 says, the sons of Reuben, the firstborn of Israel, he was the firstborn. But when he defiled his father's marriage bed, his rights as firstborn were given to the sons of Joseph, son of Israel. So he could not be listed in the genealogical record in accordance with his birthright. Reuben should have had the top position, the double portion, the leadership. But he lost it all because of his sin with Bilhah, his father's concubine. Verse 2 clarifies the situation. And though Judah was the strongest of his brothers, and a ruler came from him, the rights of the firstborn belonged to Joseph. So the birthright went to Joseph, but the kingship went to Judah. Reuben got neither. Verses 3 through 6 list Reuben's descendants anyway. The sons of Reuben, the firstborn of Israel, Hanok, Palu, Hezron, and Carmi. The descendants of Joel, Shemaiah his son, Gog his son, Shimei his son, Micah his son, Reiah his son, Baal his son, and Bera his son, whom Tiglath-Pileser king of Assyria took into exile. Bera was a leader of the Reubenites. Verses 7 through 10 explain where they lived and what they did. Their relatives by clans are listed according to their genealogical records: Jael the chief, Zechariah, and Bela son of Azaz, the son of Shema, the son of Joel. They settled in the area from Aroer to Nebo and Baal-Meon. To the east, they occupied the land up to the edge of the desert that extends to the Euphrates River, because their livestock had increased in Gilead. During Saul's reign, they waged war against the Hagrites, who were defeated at their hands. They occupied the dwellings of the Hagrites throughout the entire region east of Gilead. Verse 11 introduces Gad's tribe. The Gadites lived next to them in Bashan, as far as Salekah. Verse 12 lists their leaders. Joel was the chief, Shapham the second, then Janai and Shaphat. In Bashan, verses 13 and 14 name their relatives by families: Michael, Meshullam, Sheba, Jerai, Jachan, and Eber, 7 in all. These were the sons of Abihail, son of Huri, the son of Jeroah, the son of Gilead, the son of Michael, the son of Jeshishai, the son of Jahdo, the son of Buz. Ahi, son of Abdiel, the son of Guni, was head of their family. Verses 16 and 17 tell us they lived in Gilead, in Bashan and its outlying villages, and on all the pasture lands of Sharon as far as they extended. All these were entered in the genealogical records during the reigns of Jotham, king of Judah, and Jeroboam, king of Israel. Verse 18 gives us the military strength of these tribes. The Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh had 44,760 men ready for military service, able-bodied men who could handle shield and sword, who could use a bow, and who were trained for battle. These were serious warriors. Verse 19 tells us they put their strength to use. They waged war against the Hagrites, Jetur, Naphish, and Nodab. Verse 20 explains how they won. They were helped in fighting them. And God delivered the Hagrites and all their allies into their hands, because they cried out to him during the battle. He answered their prayers because they trusted in him. The victory was complete. Verse 21 records the plunder. They seized the livestock of the Hagrites, 50,000 camels, 250,000 sheep, and 2,000 donkeys. They also took 100,000 people captive, and many others fell slain, because the battle was God's, and they occupied the land until the exile. Verses 23 through 24 describe the half-tribe of Manasseh. The people of the half-tribe of Manasseh were numerous. They settled in the land from Bashan to Baal-Hermon, that is, to Senir, Mount Hermon. These were the heads of their families: Epher, Ishi, Eliel, Azriel, Jeremiah, Hodaviah, and Jadiel. They were brave warriors, famous men, and heads of their families. But then verse 25 delivers devastating news. But they were unfaithful to the God of their ancestors and prostituted themselves to the gods of the peoples of the land, whom God had destroyed before them. They had everything: land, livestock, military victories, God's blessing. And they threw it all away by worshipping false gods. Verse 26 tells us the consequence. So the God of Israel stirred up the spirit of Pul, king of Assyria, that is, Tiglath-Pileser king of Assyria, who took the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh into exile. He took them to Hala, Habor, Hara, and the river of Gozan, where they are to this day. They never came back. The exile was permanent for these tribes because they abandoned the God who had given them everything. Chapter 6 begins with Levi's sons, and this genealogy gets special treatment because these are the priests and temple servants. Verse 1 lists them: the sons of Levi, Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. Verse 2 narrows down to Kohath, the sons of Kohath, Amram, Izhar, Hebron, and Uzziel. Then verse 3 gives us the most important family in Israel's history, the children of Amram. Aaron, Moses and Miriam. This is the family that led Israel out of Egypt and established the priesthood. Verses 4 through 15 carefully trace the high priestly line generation by generation. Aaron's sons were Nadab, Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar, but the line continued through Eleazar. Eleazar was the father of Phinehas, Phinehas the father of Abishua, Abishua the father of Bukki, Bukki the father of Uzzi, Uzzi the father of Zerahiah, Zerahiah the father of Meraioth, Meraioth the father of Amariah, and Moriah the father of Ahitub, Ahitub the father of Zadok, Zadok the father of Ahimaaz, Ahimaaz the father of Azariah, Azariah the father of Johanan, and Johanan the father of Azariah. It was he who served as priest in the temple Solomon built in Jerusalem. The line continues, Azariah the father of Amariah, and Moriah the father of Ahitub, Ahitub the father of Zadok, Zadok the father of Shallum, Shallum the father of Hilkiah, Hilkiah the father of Azariah, Azariah the father of Sariah, and Sariah the father of Jozadak. Jozadak was deported when the Lord sent Judah and Jerusalem into exile by the hand of Nebuchadnezzar. Verses 16 through 30 start over with Levi's 3 sons and trace their family lines in more detail. The Gershonites descended through Libni and Shimei. Verse 22 through 28 trace the Kohathites through Aminadab, Korah, Asir, Elkanah, Ebiasaph, Asir, Tahath, Uriel, Uzziah, and Shaul. This line eventually produces Samuel the prophet. Verse 28 specifies the sons of Samuel, Joel the firstborn, and Abijah the second son. Verses 29 and 30 list the Merarites through Mahli, Libni, Shimei, Uzzah, Shimei, Haggiah, and Asaiah. Verses 31 through 47 explain that David appointed certain men to lead the music in the house of the Lord after the ark came to rest there. Heman the musician came from the Kohathites. His genealogy is traced all the way back through 20 generations to Levi. Asaph served at Heman's right hand and came from the Gershonites. His line is also traced back to Levi. Ethan, son of Kish, served at Heman's left hand and came from the Merarites, with his genealogy also reaching back to Levi. All 3 divisions of Levi were represented in worship leadership. Verse 49 reminds us of Aaron's special role. But Aaron and his descendants were the ones who presented offerings on the altar of burnt offering and on the altar of incense in connection with all that was done in the most holy place, making atonement for Israel in accordance with all that Moses, the servant of God, had commanded. Verses 50 through 53 trace Aaron's line once more through Eleazar, Phinehas, Abishua, Bukki, Uzzi, Zerahiah, Meraioth, Amariah, Ahitub, Zadok, and Ahimaaz. Then verses 54 through 81 detail where all the Levites lived throughout Israel. This is important because the Levites didn't get one large territory like the other tribes. Instead, they received cities scattered throughout all the tribal lands. Verse 54 begins, "These were the locations of their settlements allotted as their territory. They were assigned to the descendants of Aaron who were from the Kohathite clan, because the first lot was for them. They were given Hebron in Judah with its surrounding pasture lands. But the fields and villages around the city were given to Caleb, son of Jephunneh." Verses 57 through 60 list the other towns given to Aaron's descendants: Libnah, Jatir, Eshtemoa, Helon, Debir, Ashan, and Beth Shemesh, together with their pasture lands. From the tribe of Benjamin, they were given Gibeon, Geba, Alameth, and Anathoth, together with their pasture lands. The total number of towns distributed among the Kohathite clans came to 13. The rest of Kohath's descendants were allotted 10 towns from the clans of half the tribe of Manasseh. The Gershonites received 13 towns from the tribes of Issachar, Asher, Naphtali, and the part of Manasseh in Bashan. The Merarites received 12 towns from the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and Zebulun. The chapter ends by listing specific cities given to each Levitical group. From Ephraim they received Shechem, Gezer, Jokmeam, Beth-horon, Aijalon, and Gath-rimmon. From half-tribe of Manasseh they received Anah and Bileam. The Gershonites received towns from Manasseh, Issachar, Asher, and Naphtali. The Merarites received towns from Zebulun, Reuben, and Gad. These weren't just random places. These were homes, centers of worship, places where the Levites would live among the other tribes, teaching the law and leading the people in serving God. Every tribe contributed towns so that throughout all Israel there would be Levites living among them, reminding the people who they belonged to and how they should live. Chapter 7 shifts to the northern tribes, and it opens with Issachar. Verse 1 lists his 4 sons, the sons of Issachar, Tola, Puah, Jashub, and Shimron, 4 in all. These weren't just names on a list. These 4 men became the heads of families that would fill the land and defend it. Verse 2 zooms in on Tola's descendants. The sons of Tola, Uzi, Repiah, Jeriel, Jamai, Ibsam, and Samuel, heads of their families. During the reign of David, the descendants of Tola, listed as fighting men in their genealogy, numbered 22,600. That's just one branch of Issachar. And they had over 22,000 warriors ready for battle. Verse 3 continues, the son of Uzi, Izrahiah. The sons of Izrahiah, Michael, Obadiah, Joel, and Ishiah. All 5 of them were chiefs. Then verse 4 gives us more numbers. According to their family genealogy, they had 36,000 men ready for battle, for they had many wives and children. These families were growing, multiplying, building strength. Verse 5 wraps up Issachar's count. The relatives who were fighting men belonging to all the clans of Issachar, as listed in their genealogy, were 87,000 in all. When you add up all the branches, all the families, all the clans, Issachar contributed 87,000 fighting men to Israel's army. This tribe wasn't just about farming the fertile Jezreel Valley. They were warriors, strategists, men who understood what needed to be done and had the strength to do it. Verse 6 introduces Benjamin's sons, 3 sons of Benjamin, Bela, Becca, and Jediael. Only 3 are listed here, though we know Benjamin had more sons from other passages. The focus here is on the warrior lines. Verse 7 details Bela's descendants, the sons of Bela, Esbon, Uzi, Uziel, Jeremoth, and Eri, heads of families, 5 in all. Their genealogical record listed 22,034 fighting men, another 22,000 warriors from just one family branch. Verses 8 and 9 cover Bekah's line. The sons of Bekah, Zemirah, Joash, Eliezer, Elioenai, Omri, Jeremoth, Abijah, Anathoth, and Alameth. All these were the sons of Becah. Their genealogical record listed the heads of families and 2,200 fighting men, 20,000 more warriors. From the second branch, verse 10 moves to Jediael, the son of Jediel, Bilhan. The sons of Bilhan, Jush, Benjamin, Ehud, Kenana, Zethan, Tarshish, and Ahishahar. Verse 11 explains, all these sons of Jediael were heads of families. There were 17,200 fighting men ready to go out to war, 17,000 from this third line. Verse 12 adds 2 more names. The Shuppites and Huppites were the descendants of Ir, and the Hushites the descendants of Aher. Benjamin's tribe might have been small in territory, but they were fierce. These were the men who could fight with either hand, who were known throughout Israel for their skill with bow and sling. When you needed defenders who wouldn't back down, you called on Benjamin. Verse 13 gives us the briefest entry in this entire section. The sons of Naphtali, Jaziel, Guni, Jezer, and Shillem, the descendants of Bilhah. That's it. 1 verse. 4 names. The text identifies them as descendants of Bilhah, who was Rachel's maidservant and the mother of both Dan and Naphtali. The writer doesn't give us warrior counts or detailed family trees for Naphtali here, but the tribe still gets mentioned. They still get their place in the record. Even when a tribe doesn't get pages of details, they're still part of Israel's story. Naphtali settled in the northern Galilee region, and their territory would later become significant in Israel's history. But here, the chronicler simply acknowledges them and moves on. Verse 14 introduces Manasseh's family, and it immediately gets complicated. The descendants of Manasseh. Azriel was his descendant through his Aramean concubine. She gave birth to Machir, the father of Gilead. So Manasseh had a concubine from Aram, and through her came Machir, who became the father of all the Gileadites. Verse 15 continues, Machir took a wife from among the Huppites and Shuppites. His sister's name was Maacah. Another descendant was named Zelophehad, who had only daughters. That last detail matters. Zelophehad had no sons, which in that culture meant his family name and inheritance were at risk of disappearing. But his daughters did something bold. They went to Moses and the leaders and argued that they should receive their father's inheritance even though they were women. Moses brought their case before God, and God changed the law. The daughters of Zelophehad, Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah, became landowners. The chronicler doesn't tell that whole story here, but he mentions Zelophehad so we remember. Verses 16 and 17 continue Machir's line. Machir's wife Maacah gave birth to a son and named him Peresh. His brother was named Sheresh, and his sons were Ulam and Rakem. The son of Ulam, Bedan. These were the sons of Gilead, son of Machir, the son of Manasseh. Then verse 18 adds, his sister Hameleketh gave birth to Ishhod, Ibiezer, and Mahlah. Verse 19 wraps up this section. The sons of Shemida were Ayan, Shechem, Likhi, and Aniam. Manasseh's genealogy weaves through multiple wives, concubines, and complicated family relationships. But all these names represent real families who settled the land, raised children, and contributed to the tribe's strength. Verse 20 begins tracing Ephraim's line. The descendants of Ephraim, Shuthelah, Bered his son, Tahath his son, Eleada his son, Tahath his son, Zabad his son, and Shuthelah his son. The names flow down through generations, but then verse 21 interrupts the list with a tragedy. Ezer and Elead were killed by the native-born men of Gath when they went down to seize their livestock. This wasn't a battle. This wasn't a war. Ephraim's sons went on a raid to steal cattle from Gath, and the men of Gath killed them. Verse 22 tells us what happened next. Their father Ephraim mourned for them many days, and his relatives came to comfort him. Ephraim lost his sons, and the grief nearly broke him. The text says he mourned for many days. His family came and sat with him in his pain, but life continued. Verse 23 says, then he made love to his wife again, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. He named him Beriah because there had been misfortune in his family. The name Beriah sounds like the Hebrew word for misfortune or trouble. Every time Ephraim called his son's name, he remembered the sons he'd lost. But Beriah also represented hope, a new beginning after tragedy. Verse 24 adds a detail. His daughter was Shirah, who built Lower and Upper Beth Horon as well as Uzan Shirah, a woman who built 3 towns. This wasn't common, and the text makes sure we know about her. Verses 25 through 27 trace the line forward. Rapha was his son, Resheph his son, Telah his son, Tahan his son, Ludden his son, Amihud his son, Elishama his son, Nun his son, and Joshua his son. There it is at the end, Joshua. From Ephraim's tragedy and pain, from a son named Trouble, came the man who would lead Israel into the promised land. Joshua, whose name means the Lord saves, would be the warrior who conquered Canaan and gave each tribe their inheritance. Verses 28 and 29 describe where Ephraim's descendants lived. Their lands and settlements included Bethel and its surrounding villages, Naran to the east, Gezer and its villages to the west, and Shechem and its villages all the way to Ayyah and its villages. Along the borders of Manasseh were Beth-shan, Tanakh, Megiddo, and Dor, together with their villages. The descendants of Joseph, son of Israel, lived in these towns. Ephraim and Manasseh, the 2 sons of Joseph, filled the central hill country of Israel. Verse 30 introduces Asher's sons, the sons of Asher, Imnah, Ishva, Ishvi, and Beriah. Their sister was Serah, 4 sons and a daughter, and the chronicler makes sure to name the sister. Verse 31 continues with Beriah's sons. The sons of Beriah, Heber and Malchiel, who was the father of Beerzaith. Verse 32 traces Heber's line. Heber was the father of Japhlet, Shomer and Hotham, and of their sister Shua. Then verses 33 through 35 list Japhlet's descendants, Shomer's descendants, and the sons of Halem. The families branch and grow, each name representing a clan within Asher. Verses 36 through 39 continue listing names through Zophah's line, Ullah's line, and others. These are the heads of families, the leaders of clans. Then verse 40 sums it up. All these were descendants of Asher, heads of families, choice men, brave warriors, and outstanding leaders. The number of men ready for battle, as listed in their genealogy, was 26,000. Asher settled in the northwestern coastal region along the Mediterranean. Jacob had blessed Asher with rich food and royal delicacies. The land was fertile, the tribe prospered, and they contributed 26,000 warriors to Israel's defense. They were brave, they were leaders, and they were ready when called. Chapter 8 returns to Benjamin with much more detail than chapter 7 gave. Verse 1 starts over. Benjamin was the father of Bela, his firstborn, Ashbel the second son, Ahara the third, Nohah the fourth, and Rapha the fifth. 5 sons listed this time, showing different family lines. Verses 3 through 7 trace Bela's descendants and explain some migrations. Ehud is mentioned, the left-handed judge who killed Eglon, king of Moab. Naaman, Ahijah, and Gera were also among Bela's sons. Verse 6 tells us these were heads of families living in Geba who were deported to Manahath. Verse 7 says Naaman, Ahijah, and Gera led them into exile. These internal deportations happened as families moved and settled in different areas. Verses 8 through 28 detail multiple family lines, focusing especially on those who settled in Jerusalem and the surrounding areas. Verse 8 introduces Shaharaim, who had sons in Moab after he divorced his wives Hushim and Bara. His new wife Hodesh bore him several sons. The text carefully tracks which sons came from which wife and where they lived. Verse 13 mentions Beriah and Shema, who were heads of families of those living in Aijalon and who drove out the inhabitants of Gath. More conflicts with the Philistine city of Gath, and Benjamin's warriors were the ones handling it. Verses 29 through 32 list those who lived in Gibeon, including Jael, the father of Gibeon. His wife's name was Maacah, and they had many sons. Then verses 33 through 40 trace the family line that would become most important, Saul's family. Verse 33 says, Ner was the father of Kish, Kish the father of Saul, and Saul the father of Jonathan, Malchishua, Abinadab, and Eshbaal, Udril. There's the royal line of Benjamin. Saul, Israel's first king, came from this tribe. Verse 34 continues with Jonathan's son, the son of Jonathan, Merib-Baal, who was the father of Micah. Verses 35 through 38 trace Micah's descendants through several generations, listing many sons and grandsons. Verse 38 mentions Azel, who had 6 sons, Azrikam, Bokeru, Ishmael, Shariah, Obadiah, and Hanan. Verse 39 says his brother Eshek had 3 sons, Ulam, Jush, and Eliphalet. Verse 40 concludes, the sons of Ulam were brave warriors who could handle the bow. They had many sons and grandsons, 150 in all. All these were the descendants of Benjamin. Benjamin might have been the smallest tribe in territory, but they produced fighters, kings, and families that remained loyal to Jerusalem even when the kingdom split. They stayed with Judah, and together these 2 tribes kept the Davidic line alive. Chapter 9 makes a massive time jump. Verse 1 explains what happened. All Israel was listed in the genealogies recorded in the book of the kings of Israel and Judah. They were taken captive to Babylon because of their unfaithfulness. The exile happened, the kingdoms fell, the people were carried away to Babylon because they broke covenant with God. But verse 2 tells us something important. Now the first, To resettle on their own property in their own towns were some Israelites, priests, Levites, and temple servants. After 70 years, people came back. Not everyone, but enough to restart life in the land. They returned to their towns, reclaimed their property, and began rebuilding. Verses 3 through 9 list who came back to live in Jerusalem. From Judah, from Benjamin, and from Ephraim and Manasseh, families returned to the capital city. Verse 3 specifies the people from Judah, from Benjamin, and from Ephraim and Manasseh who lived in Jerusalem were. Then the text names specific individuals and their families. Uthai, son of Ammihud, came from Judah's line through Perez. Asaiah the firstborn came with his sons from the Shelonites. From the Zerahites came Jul. Verse 6 says, these families from Judah numbered 690 men. Verses 7 through 9 list the Benjamites who returned: Salu, son of Meshullam, Ibniah, son of Jeroham, Elah, son of Uzzi, and others. Verse 9 gives their total. All these men were heads of their families. The people from Benjamin, as listed in their genealogy, numbered 956. So nearly 1,000 Benjamite men returned to Jerusalem, bringing their families with them. Verses 10 through 13 focus on the priests who came back. Jedaiah, Jehoiarib, and Jachin returned. Also Azariah, son of Hilkiah, who came from the line of the chief official in charge of the house of God. Adiah, son of Jeroham, came from another priestly line. Masai, son of Adiel, from yet another. Verse 13 counts them. The priests, who were heads of families, numbered 1,160. They were able men, responsible for ministering in the house of God. Nearly 2,000 priests returned and took up their duties again. Verses 14 through 16 list the Levites who came back. Shemaiah, son of Hashub, from the Merarites, Bakbakar, Heresh, Galal, and Mattaniah, son of Micah. Also Obadiah, son of Shemaiah, and Berechiah, son of Asa. These Levites came from different Levitical families, ready to serve in the temple that would be rebuilt. Verses 17 through 27 describe the gatekeepers. Verse 17 names the leaders, the gatekeepers: Shallum, Akub, Talmon, Ahiman, and their fellow Levites, Shallum their chief being stationed at the king's gate on the east, up to the present time. These were the gatekeepers belonging to the camp of the Levites. Verse 22 gives the total. Altogether, those chosen to be gatekeepers at the thresholds numbered 212. They were registered by genealogy in their villages. These weren't just doormen. Verse 23 explains, they and their descendants were in charge of guarding the gates of the house of the Lord, the house called the Tent of Meeting. This was the same job their ancestors had done during David's time. Verse 24 says the gatekeepers were on the four sides: east, west, north, and south. North and. Verse 25 tells us their fellow Levites in the villages had to come and help them for periods of 7 days. Verses 26 through 27 describe their responsibilities. But the 4 principal gatekeepers, who were Levites, were entrusted with the responsibility for the rooms and treasuries in the house of God. They would spend the night stationed around the house of God because they had to guard it, and they had charge of the key for opening it each morning. They guarded the temple, they protected the treasuries, they opened the doors every morning. Verses 28 through 32 explain even more duties. Some Levites were in charge of the articles used in temple service, counting them when they were brought in and when they were taken out. Others were assigned to care for the furnishings and all. The sacred articles, along with the special flour, wine, olive oil, incense, and spices. Some priests prepared the mixture of spices. Mattithiah, one of the Levites, and the firstborn son of Shallum the Korahite, was entrusted with baking the offering bread. Some of the Kohathites were responsible for preparing the bread set out on the table every Sabbath. Verses 33 and 34 conclude this section. Those who were musicians, heads of Levite families, stayed in the rooms of the temple and were exempt from other duties because they were responsible for the work day and night. All these were heads of Levite families, chiefs as listed in their genealogy, and they lived in Jerusalem. Indeed, the musicians had special status. They worked day and night leading worship, so they were freed from other duties. The exile was over for those who returned. Jerusalem had people again. The temple would be rebuilt. The priests were offering sacrifices. The Levites were serving. The gatekeepers were guarding. The musicians were singing. Life was resuming. Worship was being restored. And God's presence was coming back to his city. Not everyone made it back from Babylon, but those who did came ready to serve. Chapter 10 opens with a battle that would end Israel's first kingdom. Verse 1 sets the scene. Now the Philistines fought against Israel. The Israelites fled before them, and many fell dead on Mount Gilboa. This wasn't a small skirmish. This was a full-scale war, and Israel was losing badly. The Philistines were pushing them back, chasing them down, and bodies were falling all over the mountain. Verse 2 tells us what happened to Saul's family. The Philistines were in hot pursuit of Saul and his sons, and they killed his sons Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchi-Shua. 3 sons dead. Jonathan, the brave warrior who had once attacked a Philistine garrison with just his armor-bearer. Jonathan, David's closest friend, gone. His brothers Abinadab and Malchi-Shua also killed. Saul watched his sons die around him. Verse 3 describes Saul's desperate situation. The fighting grew fierce around Saul, and when the archers overtook him, they wounded him. The Philistine archers had found their target. Arrows hit Saul, and he knew he was finished. He was wounded, surrounded, and his sons were dead. The battle was lost. Verse 4 shows us Saul's final moments. Saul said to his armor-bearer, "Draw your sword and run me through, or these uncircumcised fellows will come and abuse me." But his armor-bearer was terrified and would not do it, so Saul took his own sword and fell on it. Saul couldn't bear the thought of being captured alive by the Philistines. He knew what they would do to him: torture, mockery, humiliation. So he ordered his armor-bearer to kill him. But the young man couldn't do it. He was too afraid, too shocked. So Saul took his own sword, planted it in the ground, and fell on it. Israel's first king died by his own hand on a mountain covered with the bodies of his soldiers. Verse 5 tells us what the armor-bearer did next. When the armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he too fell on his sword and died. But the young man couldn't live with what he'd witnessed. He followed his king into death. Verse 6 sums up the tragedy. So Saul and his 3 sons died, and all his house died together. The dynasty was finished. The royal family was gone. Everything Saul had built collapsed in one day. Verse 7 describes the aftermath. When all the Israelites in the valley saw that the army had fled and that Saul and his sons had died, they abandoned their towns and fled, and the Philistines came and occupied them. The defeat was so complete that entire towns emptied out. People ran for their lives, and the Philistines moved in and took over. Israel's first experiment with kingship ended in disaster. The next day, verse 8 tells us, when the Philistines came to strip the dead, they found Saul and his sons fallen on Mount Gilboa. The Philistines were going through the battlefield, taking armor and weapons from the corpses. That's when they discovered who they'd killed. Verse 9 describes what they did. They stripped him and took his head and his armor, and sent messengers throughout the land of the Philistines to proclaim the news among their idols and their people. This wasn't just about taking trophies. This was propaganda. They sent word everywhere that Saul was dead. They wanted everyone to know they defeated Israel's king. Verse 10 tells us where they put Saul's armor and head. They put his armor in the temple of their gods and hung up his head in the temple of Dagon. Dagon was the Philistine god, and they treated Saul's death as their god's victory over Israel's God. They displayed Saul's head in Dagon's temple like a trophy, mocking Israel and their faith. But verse 11 introduces unexpected heroes. When all the inhabitants of Jabesh-Gilead heard what the Philistines had done to Saul, they remembered. Years earlier, when Jabesh-Gilead was under siege by the Ammonites, Saul had been the one who rescued them. It was his first major act as king. Now those same people heard how the Philistines were dishonoring his body. Verse 12 tells us what they did. All their valiant men went and took the bodies of Saul and his sons and brought them to Jabesh. Then they buried their bones under the great tree in Jabesh, and they fasted 7 days. These men risked their lives to recover the bodies. They traveled to Philistine territory, took Saul and his sons, brought them home, and gave them an honorable burial. Then they mourned for a week. Loyalty like that doesn't die, even when kingdoms fall, but the chronicler isn't finished with Saul's story. Verse 13 explains why everything ended this way. Saul died because he was unfaithful to the Lord. He did not keep the word of the Lord and even consulted a medium for guidance. 3 charges against Saul. He was unfaithful. He disobeyed God's commands. And when he was desperate, instead of turning to God, he went to a witch at Endor to call up the dead prophet Samuel. Verse 14 concludes, "And did not inquire of the Lord. So the Lord put him to death and turned the kingdom over to David, son of Jesse." Saul's real problem wasn't military strategy or bad luck. His problem was that he stopped seeking God. When you stop asking God for help, when you turn to everything except the Lord, you're cutting yourself off from the only source of real help. God removed Saul and gave the throne to someone who would seek him, David. Chapter 11 shifts everything. Verse 1 opens with a completely different scene. All Israel came together to David at Hebron and said, "We are your own flesh and blood." This wasn't just Judah showing up. This was all 12 tribes sending representatives. They came to Hebron, David's base in the south, and they came with one purpose: to make him king over all Israel. Verse 2 shows they'd been watching David for years. In the past, even while Saul was king, you were the one who led Israel on their military campaigns. And the Lord your God said to you, "You will shepherd my people Israel, and you will become their ruler." They admitted what everyone knew. Even when Saul wore the crown, David was the one winning the battles. David was the one people trusted. And most importantly, God had already chosen David. The prophet Samuel had anointed him years ago when he was just a shepherd boy. Verse 3 records what happened next. When all the elders of Israel had come to King David at Hebron, he made a covenant with them at Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel, as the Lord had promised through Samuel. This was official. This was unanimous. The elders came, representing every tribe. David made a covenant with them, a formal agreement about how he would rule and what they could expect. Then they poured oil on his head and declared him king. Everything God promised through Samuel was coming true. The shepherd boy was now the shepherd of the nation. David's first move as king shows his strategic mind. Verse 4 tells us, David and all the Israelites marched to Jerusalem, that is Jebus. The Jebusites who lived there said to David, "You will not get in here." Jerusalem sat on a hill between the northern and southern tribes. It was a fortress, and it had never been fully conquered by Israel. The Jebusites had held it for generations, and they were confident. Their city walls were strong, their position was high, and they mocked David's army. But verse 5 gives us the result. Nevertheless, David captured the fortress of Zion, which is the city of David. Despite the Jebusites' confidence, David took the city. How did he do it? The text doesn't give us all the details here, but we know from other passages that they found a way in through the water shaft. Verse 6 tells us about a key moment in the battle. David had said, "Whoever leads the attack on the Jebusites will become commander-in-chief." Joab, son of Zeruiah, went up first, and so he received the command. David made an offer. Whoever is brave enough to lead this dangerous assault gets the top military position. Joab, David's nephew, stepped up. He went first, he led the charge, and he earned the position of commander of David's army. Verse 7 confirms the victory. David then took up residence in the fortress, and so it was called the City of David. This wasn't just a military win. This was David establishing his capital. Jerusalem became his city, his stronghold, his headquarters. The location was perfect, between north and south on a hill with natural defenses. It would become the most important city in Israel's history. Verse 8 tells us what David did next. He built up the city around it, from the terraces to the surrounding wall, while Joab restored the rest of the city. David immediately started construction projects. He reinforced the walls, built up the fortifications, expanded the city. Meanwhile, Joab worked on rebuilding and restoring other parts of Jerusalem. They were making this place ready to be the center of the kingdom. Verse 9 explains why all this worked, and David became more and more powerful because the Lord Almighty was with him. That's the key. David's success wasn't just about military skill or smart strategy. God was with him. When God backs you, you move from strength to strength. David kept growing in power and influence because the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of heaven, was on his side. Verse 10 introduces the men who made David's success possible. These were the chiefs of David's mighty warriors. They, together with all Israel, gave his kingship strong support to extend it over the whole land. As the Lord had promised, these weren't just soldiers. These were the elite, the heroes, the men who stood with David through everything. Verse 11 introduces the first. This is the list of David's mighty warriors. Jashobeam, a Hakmonite, was chief of the officers. He raised his spear against 300 men, whom he killed in one encounter. 300 enemies. One man, one battle. Jashobeam was the kind of warrior that entire armies feared. Verse 12 introduces the second. Next to him was Eleazar, son of Dodai the Ahohite, one of the 3 mighty warriors. Verse 13 tells his story. He was with David at Pasdamim when the Philistines gathered there for battle. At a place where there was a field full of barley, the troops fled from the Philistines. The Israelite army ran away. Everyone was retreating. But verse 14 says, "But they took their stand in the middle of the field. They defended it and struck the Philistines down, and the Lord brought about a great victory." Eleazar refused to run. He stood his ground in that barley field and fought until the Philistines broke. His hand gripped his sword so tightly for so long that when the battle ended, his hand had cramped around the handle. He literally couldn't let go. That's the kind of determination these men had. Verses 15 through 19 tell maybe the most famous story about David's warriors. Verse 15 sets the scene. 3 of the 30 chiefs came down to David to the rock at the cave of Adullam, while a band of Philistines was encamped in the valley of Rephaim. David was in a cave, and the Philistines controlled the area. Verse 16 tells us what David was thinking. At that time, David was in the stronghold, and the Philistine garrison was at Bethlehem. Bethlehem was David's hometown. He'd grown up there, played there as a boy, tended sheep in those hills, and now enemy soldiers occupied it. Verse 17 shows us David's heart. David longed for water and said, "Oh, that someone would get me a drink of water from the well near the gate of Bethlehem." He wasn't ordering anyone. He was just thinking out loud, missing home, wishing for a drink from the well he remembered from his childhood. But his 3 mightiest warriors heard him. Verse 18 tells us what they did. So the 3 broke through the Philistine lines, drew water from the well near the gate of Bethlehem, and carried it back to David. But he refused to drink it. Instead, he poured it out to the Lord. These 3 men fought their way through enemy lines, risked their lives, got the water and brought it back. And David couldn't drink it. Verse 19 explains why. "God forbid that I should do this," he said. "Should I drink the blood of these men who went at the risk of their lives?" Because they risked their lives to bring it back, David would not drink it. Such were the exploits of the 3 mighty warriors. David called it blood because they could have died getting it. They valued him so much they risked everything for water. He valued them so much he poured it out as an offering to God instead of drinking it. That's the kind of loyalty and love that existed between David and his men. Verse 20 introduces another famous warrior. Abishai, the brother of Joab, was chief of the three. He raised his spear against 300 men, whom he killed, and so he became as famous as the three. Abishai, Joab's brother, earned his reputation by killing 300 enemies with his spear. He was almost as legendary as the top three. Verse 21 notes, he was doubly honored above the three and became their commander, even though he was not included among them. Abishai commanded the three, but he wasn't counted as one of them. The original three held a special place. Verse 22 introduces Benaiah. Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, a valiant fighter from Kabzeel, performed great exploits. He struck down Moab's two mightiest warriors. He also went down into a pit on a snowy day and killed a lion. Let that sink in. Benaiah climbed down into a pit on a snowy day and fought a lion hand to hand. And 1. Verse 23 adds another story. And he struck down an Egyptian who was 5 cubits tall. Although the Egyptian had a spear like a weaver's rod in his hand, Benaiah went against him with a club. He snatched the spear from the Egyptian's hand and killed him with his own spear. This Egyptian was over 7 feet tall, carrying a massive spear. Benaiah had a club. He went at the giant anyway, grabbed the spear away from him, and killed him with it. Verse 24 sums up Benaiah's reputation. Such were the exploits of Benaiah, son of Jehoiada. He too was as famous as the 3 mighty warriors. Verse 25 adds, he was held in greater honor than any of the 30, but he was not included among the 3. And David put him in charge of his bodyguard. Benaiah became David's personal security chief because David trusted him completely. Verses 26 through 47 list the rest of the mighty warriors, the 30. Verse 26 begins, the mighty warriors were Asahel, the brother of Joab, Elhanan, son of Dodo from Bethlehem. The list continues, naming warrior after warrior. And here's what's remarkable. They came from all over Israel. Verse 27 mentions men from Tekoa. Verse 28 names warriors from the hill country. Verse 30 lists men from Gibeah of Benjamin. Verse 31 mentions men from Pirathon. Verse 34 even includes the sons of Hashem the Gizonite. Verse 38 lists Joel, the brother of Nathan. Verse 39 mentions Zelek the Ammonite, an Ammonite fighting for Israel. Verse 41 names Uriah the Hittite, a Hittite not even an Israelite by birth, who became one of David's mightiest warriors. This would be the same Uriah whose wife David would later take, leading to one of David's greatest sins. But here he's honored as a hero. Verse 46 concludes with Eliel the Mahavite, Jeribai and Joshaviah, the sons of Elnam, Ithma the Moabite. Verse 47 ends the list. Eliel, Obed and Jasiel the Mesobate. These men came from different tribes, different towns, even different nations. But they all united under David because they saw in him a leader worth following. They became legends because they fought beside a king who honored courage and valued loyalty. Chapter 12 takes us back in time, before David became king. Verse 1 sets the scene. These were the men who came to David at Ziklag, while he was banished from the presence of Saul, son of Kish. They were among the warriors who helped him in battle. David was still running from Saul. He was hiding in Ziklag, a Philistine town. And even then, warriors were leaving everything to join him. Verse 2 describes the first group. They were armed with bows and were able to shoot arrows or to sling stones right-handed or left-handed. They were relatives of Saul from the tribe of Benjamin. These were Benjamites, Saul's own tribesmen, who chose David over their kinsman king. And they were ambidextrous fighters, able to fight with either hand. Verses 3 through 7 name these Benjamite warriors. Ahiezer their chief and Joash the sons of Shammah the Gibeathite. Jeziel and Pelet, the sons of Asmaveth, Berakah, Jehu the Anathothite, and Ishmaiah the Gibeonite, a mighty warrior among the 30, who was a leader of the 30, Jeremiah, Jahaziel, Johanan, Jozabad the Gederathite, Eluzai, Jeremoth, Bealiah, Shemariah, and Shephatiah the Haraphite, Elkanah, Ishiah, Azarel, Joezer, and Jashobeam the Korahites, and Joelah and Zebediah the sons of Jeroham from Gedor, 11 men listed by name, plus others, all skilled warriors, all defecting from Saul to join David. Verse 8 introduces a different group. Some Gadites defected to David at his stronghold in the wilderness. They were brave warriors, ready for battle and able to handle the shield and spear. Their faces were the faces of lions, and they were as swift as gazelles in the mountains. The Gadites came from across the Jordan. They were described like wild animals, fierce as lions, fast as gazelles. These were men you wanted on your side. Verses 9 through 13, name 11 Gadite commanders. Verse 14 explains their rank. These Gadites were army commanders. The least was a match for 100, and the greatest for 1,000. The weakest of them could take on 100 enemies. The strongest could handle 1,000. These were elite warriors. Verse 15 tells us when they came. It was they who crossed the Jordan in the first month, when it was overflowing all its banks. And they put to flight everyone living in the valleys. To the east and to the west, the Jordan floods in spring. The river becomes dangerous, impassable. These Gadites crossed it anyway during flood season to join David. Then they cleared out everyone who might threaten David's position. Verses 16 and 17 describe another group arriving. Verse 16 says, "Other Benjamites and some men from Judah also came to David in his stronghold. David went out to meet them." And verse 17 records his words. David went out to meet them and said to them, "If you have come to me in peace to help me, I am ready for you to join me. But if you have come to betray me to my enemies, when my hands are free from violence, may the God of our ancestors see it and judge you." David was being careful. He'd been betrayed before. He wanted to know if they were truly with him, or if Saul had sent them as spies. Verse 18 gives us their answer, but it wasn't just words. Then the Spirit came on Amasai, chief of the 30, and he said, "We are yours, David. We are with you, son of Jesse. Success, success to you, and success to those who help you, for your God will help you." So David received them and made them leaders of his raiding bands. The Holy Spirit came on Amasai, and he prophesied. He declared their complete loyalty. He pronounced blessing on David, and he acknowledged that God was with David. After that confirmation, David accepted them and gave them leadership positions. Verses 19 through 22 tell us even more warriors joined. Verse 19 says, "Some of the tribe of Manasseh defected to David when he went with the Philistines to fight against Saul. He and his men did not help the Philistines because, after consultation, their rulers sent him away. They said, 'It will cost us our heads if he deserts to his master Saul.'" David was in a complicated situation, living among the Philistines, but not actually fighting for them. When he left, some Manassites joined him. Verse 20 names them. When David went to Ziklag, these were the men of Manasseh who defected to him: Adnah, Jozabed, Jediel, Michael, Jozabed, Elihu, and Zilithai, leaders of units of 1,000 in Manasseh, 7 leaders, each commanding 1,000 men. Verse 21 describes their value. They helped David against raiding bands, for all of them were brave warriors, and they were commanders in his army. Verse 22 sums it up. Day after day, men came to help David, until he had a great army, like the army of God. Even before David officially became king, his army was growing constantly. Men kept showing up, pledging loyalty, bringing their skills. And the text compares it to the army of God. It was that impressive. Now the text jumps forward to when David is about to become king. Verse 23 introduces the list. These are the numbers of the men armed for battle who came to David at Hebron to turn Saul's kingdom over to him, as the Lord had said. Every tribe sent warriors. Every tribe came armed and ready. Every tribe was there to make David king. Verses 24 through 37 list each tribe with their numbers. Verse 24 starts, "From Judah carrying shield and spear, 6,800 armed for battle." Judah sent nearly 7,000 warriors. Verse 25, from Simeon warriors ready for battle, 7,100. Simeon sent 7,000. Verse 26, from Levi, 4,600, including Jehoiada, leader of the family of Aaron, with 3,700 men, and Zadok, a brave young warrior, with 22 officers from his family. The Levites sent over 4,000, led by the high priest's family. Verse 27 continues, men of Benjamin, Saul's tribe, 3,000, most of whom had remained loyal to Saul's house until then. Even Benjamin, Saul's own tribe, sent 3,000 men. Most of them had stayed loyal to Saul's family until now, but they were ready to support David. Verse 28, men of Ephraim, brave warriors, famous in their own clans, 20,800. Ephraim sent over 20,000. Verse 29, men of half the tribe of Manasseh, designated by name to come and make David king, 18,000. 18,000 from half of Manasseh. Verse 30, men of Issachar, who understood the times and knew what Israel should do, 200 chiefs, with all their relatives under their command. Issachar sent only 200 chiefs, but these were special. They understood the times and knew what Israel should do. They brought wisdom and strategic thinking. Verse 31, men of Zebulun, experienced soldiers prepared for battle with every type of weapon, to help David with undivided loyalty, 50,000. Zebulun sent 50,000 experienced warriors, and the text emphasizes their undivided loyalty. Verse 32, men of Naphtali, 1,000 officers, together with 37,000 men carrying shields and spears. Naphtali sent 1,000 officers commanding 37,000 men. Verse 33, men of Dan ready for battle, 28,600. Dan sent over 28,000. Verse 34, men of Asher, experienced soldiers prepared for battle, 40,000. Asher contributed 40,000. Verse 35, and from east of the Jordan, men of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, armed with every type of weapon, 120,000. The Transjordan tribes sent a massive force, 120,000 men, fully armed. Verse 37 sums up, all these were fighting men who volunteered to serve in the ranks. They came to Hebron fully determined to make David king over all Israel. All the rest of the Israelites were also of one mind to make David king. The text emphasizes this was voluntary, this was unified, this was what everyone wanted. Verse 38 adds the total. The men spent 3 days there with David, eating and drinking, for their families had supplied provisions for them. 3 days of celebration. The tribes brought food and supplies, and they feasted together, celebrating their new king. Verses 39 and 40 describe the party. Also, their neighbors from as far away as Issachar, Zebulun and Naphtali, came bringing food on donkeys, camels, mules, and oxen. There were plentiful supplies of flour, fig cakes, raisin cakes, wine, olive oil, cattle, and sheep, for there was joy in Israel. The whole nation was celebrating. People were bringing supplies from every direction. There was food everywhere, flour, cakes, wine, oil, meat. The text ends with a simple statement, for there was joy in Israel. After years of civil war, failed leadership, and chaos, Israel finally had a king who united them, and everyone was happy about it. Chapter 13 shows David tackling one of his first priorities as king. Verse 1 tells us he didn't make this decision alone. David conferred with each of his officers, the commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds. He brought his military leaders together. Then verse 2 shows he went further. He then said to the whole assembly of Israel, "If it seems good to you, and if it is the will of the Lord our God, let us send word far and wide to the rest of our people throughout the territories of Israel, and also to the priests and Levites who are with them in their towns and pasturelands, to come and join us." David wanted everyone involved. Verse 3 reveals his plan. "Let us bring the ark of our God back to us, for we did not inquire of it during the reign of Saul." The ark had been forgotten at Kiriath Jearim. David wanted God's presence central again. Verse 4 says, "The whole assembly agreed to do this, because it seemed right to all the people." Verse 5 tells us, "David assembled all Israel, from the Shihor River in Egypt to Lebo Hamath, to bring the Ark of God from Kiriath Jearim." This was a national event. Verse 7 describes the transport. They moved the Ark of God from Abinadab's house on a new cart, with Uzzah and Ahio guiding it. A new cart seemed respectful. Verse 8 describes celebration. David and all the Israelites were celebrating with all their might before God, with songs and with harps, lyres, timbrels, cymbals, and trumpets. But verse 9 records disaster when they came to the threshing floor of Kidon. Uzzah reached out his hand to steady the ark. Because the oxen stumbled, verse 10 tells what happened. The Lord's anger burned against Uzzah, and he struck him down because he had put his hand on the ark. So he died there before God, instantly dead. Verse 11 shows David's reaction. Then David was angry because the Lord's wrath had broken out against Uzzah. Verse 12 shows anger turned to fear. David was afraid of God that day and asked, "How can I ever bring the ark of God to me?" But verse 13 says, he did not take the ark to be with him in the city of David. Instead, he took it to the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite. Verse 14 gives the result. The ark of God remained with the family of Obed-Edom in his house for 3 months, and the Lord blessed his household and everything he had. Chapter 14 shows international recognition. Verse 1 tells us, "Now Hiram, king of Tyre, sent messengers to David, along with cedar logs, stonemasons and carpenters, to build a palace for him." Verse 2 shows David understood, and David knew that the Lord had established him as king over Israel, and that his kingdom had been highly exalted for the sake of his people Israel. Verse 3 notes, "In Jerusalem David took more wives and became the father of more sons and daughters." Verses 4 through 7 list 13 sons. But verse 8 brings trouble. When the Philistines heard that David had been anointed king over all Israel, they went up in full force to search for him. Verse 10 shows David's response. So David inquired of God, "Shall I go and attack the Philistines? Will you deliver them into my hands?" The Lord answered him, "Go, I will deliver them into your hands." Verse 11 records, "So David and his men went up to Baal Perazim, and there he defeated them." Verse 13 shows they returned. Once more the Philistines raided the valley. Verse 14 shows David inquired again. So David inquired of God again, and God answered him, "Do not go directly after them, but circle around them and attack them in front of the poplar trees." Different strategy. Verse 16 says, "So David did as God commanded him, and they struck down the Philistine army, all the way from Gibeon to Gaza." Verse 17 concludes, "So David's fame spread throughout every land, and the Lord made all the nations fear him." Chapter 15 shows David trying again correctly. Verse 1 says, "After David had constructed buildings for himself in the city of David, he prepared a place for the ark of God and pitched a tent for it." Verse 2 shows the difference. "Then David said, 'No one but the Levites may carry the ark of God, because the Lord chose them to carry the ark of the Lord and to minister before him forever.'" Only Levites this time. Verses 5 through 10 list Levitical families. Kohath with 120, Merari with 220, Gershon with 130, plus 3 more families. Verse 12 records David's instructions. "You are the heads of the Levitical families. You and your fellow Levites are to consecrate yourselves and bring up the ark of the Lord, the God of Israel, to the place I have prepared for it." Verse 13 shows David acknowledging the mistake. "It was because you, the Levites, did not bring it up the first time that the Lord our God broke out in anger against us. We did not inquire of him about how to do it in the prescribed way." Verse 15 explains the proper method. "And the Levites carried the ark of God with the poles on their shoulders, as Moses had commanded in accordance with the word of the Lord." Verse 16 introduces music. David told the leaders of the Levites to appoint their fellow Levites as musicians. to make a joyful sound with musical instruments, lyres, harps and cymbals. Verses 19 through 24 detail musicians with cymbals, lyres, harps, and trumpets. Everyone had specific roles. Verse 25 describes the procession. So David and the elders of Israel and the commanders of units of 1,000 went to bring up the ark of the covenant of the Lord from the house of Obed-Edom with rejoicing. Verse 26 tells us, because God had helped the Levites who were carrying the ark of the covenant of the Lord, 7 bulls and 7 rams were sacrificed. Verse 27 describes clothing. Now David was clothed in a robe of fine linen, as were all the Levites who were carrying the ark, and as were the musicians and Kenaniah, who was in charge of the singing of the choirs. David also wore a linen ephod. Verse 28 describes the scene. So all Israel brought up the ark of the covenant of the Lord with shouts, with the sounding of rams' horns and trumpets and of cymbals, and the playing of lyres and harps. The noise must have been incredible. Verse 29 shows contrast. As the ark of the covenant of the Lord was entering the city of David, Michal, daughter of Saul, watched from a window. And when she saw King David dancing and celebrating, she despised him in her heart. Michal judged David's worship as beneath a king's dignity. Chapter 16 opens with a rival. Verse 1 says, "They brought the ark of God and set it inside the tent that David had pitched for it. And they presented burnt offerings and fellowship offerings before God." Verse 2 shows David's role. After David had finished sacrificing the burnt offerings and fellowship offerings, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord. Verse 3 shows generosity. Then he gave a loaf of bread, a cake of dates and a cake of raisins to each Israelite man and woman. Everyone received food from David personally. Verse 4 establishes permanent worship. He appointed some of the Levites to minister before the ark of the Lord, to extol, thank, and praise the Lord, the God of Israel. Verse 5 names the leaders. Asaph was the chief, and next to him in rank was Zechariah, then Jaziel, Shemiramoth, Jehiel, Mattithiah, Eliab, Benaiah, Obed-Edom, and Jeiel. They were to play the lyres and harps. Asaph was to sound the cymbals, verse 6 adds, and Benaiah and Jahaziel the priests were to blow the trumpets regularly before the Ark of the Covenant of God. Daily worship was now established in Jerusalem. Verse 7 tells us, that day David first appointed Asaph and his associates to give praise to the Lord in this manner. David composed a psalm for the occasion. Verse 8 begins, "Give praise to the Lord, proclaim his name, make known among the nations what he has done." Verses 9 through 14 call for worship and remembrance. Sing to him, sing praise to him, tell of all his wonderful acts, glory in his holy name. Let the hearts of those who seek the Lord rejoice. Look to the Lord and his strength, seek his face always. Remember the wonders he has done, his miracles, and the judgments he pronounced, you, his servants, the descendants of Israel, his chosen ones, the children of Jacob. He is the Lord our God. His judgments are in all the earth. Verses 15 through 18 recall the covenant. He remembers his covenant forever. The promise he made for 1,000 generations. The covenant he made with Abraham. The oath he swore to Isaac. He confirmed it to Jacob as a decree, to Israel as an everlasting covenant. To you I will give the land of Canaan as the portion you will inherit. Verses 23 through 27 call all nations to worship. Sing to the Lord, all the earth. Proclaim his salvation day after day. Declare his glory among the nations, his marvelous deeds among all peoples. For great is the Lord and most worthy of praise. He is to be feared above all gods. For all the gods of the nations are idols, but the Lord made the heavens. Splendor and majesty are before him. Strength and joy are in his dwelling place. Verse 31 celebrates, "Let the heavens rejoice, let the earth be glad. Let them say among the nations, the Lord reigns. In verse 34 includes the refrain, "Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His love endures forever." Verse 36 concludes, "Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, from everlasting to everlasting." Then all the people said, "Amen," and praise the Lord. Corporate worship at its best. Verse 37 establishes daily worship in Jerusalem. David left Asaph and his associates before the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord to minister there regularly, according to each day's requirements. Verse 38 adds, "He also left Obed-Edom and his 68 associates to minister with them." Verse 39 shows worship continued elsewhere. David left Zadok the priest and his fellow priests before the tabernacle of the Lord at the high place in Gibeon. The old tabernacle remained active. Verse 40 explains, "To present burnt offerings to the Lord on the altar of burnt offering regularly, morning and evening, in accordance with everything written in the law of the Lord, which he had given Israel." Verse 41 names musicians there. With them were Heman and Jeduthun, and the rest of those chosen and designated by name to give thanks to the Lord, for his love endures forever. Verse 42 specifies, Heman and Jeduthun were responsible for the sounding of the trumpets and cymbals, and for the playing of the other instruments for sacred song. Verse 43 concludes simply, "Then all the people left, each for their own home, and David returned home to bless his family." The celebration ended and normal life resumed. Chapter 17 records the most important moment. Verse 1 says, "After David was settled in his palace, he said to Nathan the prophet, 'Here I am, living in a house of cedar, while the ark of the covenant of the Lord is under a tent.'" David felt uncomfortable. Verse 2 shows Nathan's response. Nathan replied to David, "Whatever you have in mind, do it, for God is with you." But verse 3 says, "But that night the word of God came to Nathan." God had different plans. Verse 4 records, "Go and tell my servant David, this is what the Lord says. You are not the one to build me a house to dwell in." David wouldn't build the temple. Verses 7 and 8 remind David of his journey. "I took you from the pasture, from tending the flock, and appointed you ruler over my people Israel. I have been with you wherever you have gone, and I have cut off all your enemies from before you. Now I will make your name like the names of the greatest men on earth." Verses 10 through 14 give God's promise. "I declare to you that the Lord will build a house for you. When your days are over and you go to be with your ancestors, I will raise up your offspring to succeed you, one of your own sons, and I will establish his kingdom. He is the one who will build a house for me, and I will establish his throne forever. I will be his father, and he will be my son. I will never take my love away from him, as I took it away from your predecessor. I will set him over my house and my kingdom forever. His throne will be established forever." God would build David's dynasty. His son would build the temple. His throne would last forever. Verse 16 shows David's response. "Then King David went in and sat before the Lord. And he said, 'Who am I, Lord God, and what is my family, that you have brought me this far?'" David was overwhelmed. Verse 17 continues, "And as if this were not enough in your sight, my God, you have spoken about the future of the house of your servant." Verse 20 praises, "There is no one like you, Lord, and there is no God but you, as we have heard with our own ears." Verses 21 and 22 celebrate Israel's uniqueness. "And who is like your people Israel, the one nation on earth whose God went out to redeem a people for himself, and to make a name for yourself, and to perform great and awesome wonders by driving out nations from before your people, whom you redeemed from Egypt. You made your people Israel your very own forever, and you, Lord, have become their God." Verse 23 turns to prayer. "And now, Lord, let the promise you have made concerning your servant and his house be established forever. Do as you promised." Verse 25 explains David's confidence. "You, my God, have revealed to your servant that you will build a house for him. So your servant has found courage to pray to you." Verse 27 concludes, Now you have been pleased to bless the house of your servant, that it may continue forever in your sight. For you, Lord, have blessed it, and it will be blessed forever. God promised an eternal dynasty. David's line would never end. If this journey through 1 Chronicles opened your eyes to something new, if it made these genealogies come alive, if it helped you see God's faithfulness in a fresh way, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next biblical adventure we uncover together. And share this video with someone who needs to discover that the boring parts of the Bible are actually filled with incredible stories of faith, courage, and God's unstoppable plan. The story doesn't end here. There's so much more to discover in God's Word. So stay tuned, stay curious, and keep digging into the treasures hidden in Scripture. See you in the next one.